All right, welcome to another installment of Jay's Analysis. We have with us two esteemed guests, Father Vladimir Kadernov and Andrei Tarkovsky Jr. And we're going to be talking about the film Rublev from 1966. Of course, we did last time the documentary that Andrei did about his father and the films. And today we're going to be talking about one of the more prominent ones that I think everybody will be familiar with if you are a fan of Tarkovsky. Is we thought, since there's going to be, I think, a new release of the film, we thought it would be appropriate to do an interview on the basis of this one. And so I think the best way would just be to launch into it and ask the question of how did this come about? What was the origin of the idea and the screenplay, Andrei?
Yes, well, it was 1960. My father was finishing the editing of the Ivan's Childhood. It was his first film, made at Mosfilm. And 1960 was the year where finally the Soviet government rediscovered, find out that they had a great painter, Andrei Rublev. So it came out, it was just the beginning of the Khrushchev epoch era. So there was kind of winds of possible freedom, and the discussion about the Russian icon painter could be possible. And actually, they made a great exposition of Andrei Rublev in Moscow. They printed the catalog, and the people got to know. Finally, who didn't know, they find out, discovered that they have this kind of Leonardo da Vinci of Russia, the greatest icon painter. And of course, my father and Andrei Konchalovsky, his colleague, his younger colleague from Geek, with him, he worked already on a script of Ivan's Childhood. And another actor, Livanov Vasily, who proposed, actually, why don't we have an idea of a script of the film and so on. So they met, and I think Livanov wasn't there, and my father and Konchalovsky continued to work on the script. So they started to gather material, books, reading a lot, and actually it was very complicated work because they were quite young, and there are no literature practically about Rublev because we don't know nothing about his biography. Well, this was a negative and a positive point because it gave not much information about Rublev, but it gave a lot of creative freedom for the authors to depict his life, to imagine the life of medieval Russia. And so it's most of the film, most of the script it's an invention. It's not based on there are some milestone the dates of his creation, but that's all the rest is actually the creative work of the authors. And the work was quite they finished, my father completed the Ivan's Childhood. They continued with the script, and the script was it became with more than 300 pages. It was almost a novel, almost a big novel. And actually, it was very well received by the studios. And at that point, it was well received. And to justify it, they actually published it. It was published in Искусство Kino, which is the most important Soviet and Russian now magazine of cinema magazine, monthly magazine. And actually, they were given a green light for the production. There were a lot of course, discussion and quite interesting reports, which I read through my father's archives, which was talking about how to develop the characters. But the discussions were quite interesting, quite free. It was the discussion of the censorship of the cultural committee of the studios, where of course there are a lot of functionaries and colleagues of my father, which I was thinking were always very strict on Soviet realism ideas. But to the contrary, I find out that their discussions were quite free. They were mostly discussing about the biblical quotes to use for the film, which are the best one, which is not And it was quite interesting, and everybody liked a lot the project. So the film became actually one of the most important projects for the studios of the time. It wasn't a sideway project; it was the main and high budget, almost colossal for that time budget film. And they began shooting in 1964, so 4 years after they began the writing of the script, and they completed the shooting and editing by 1966. When the film was finished, of course, there were some censorship over it, but most overall it was well accepted. It was supposed to come out, but then something happened right between, like, a few days between the release of the film. Someone called. They made another reunion. Actually, they canceled the first presentation of the film and sent to my father a lot of things to correct of the film, scenes to cut, ideas to reshoot, and that was a very complicated story. Since then, actually, for the first time, the film came out in 1969. And it was almost the fourth version of the film. Actually, what we see in the cinemas today is the fourth version of the film. The previous version, the first version I was talking about, which was finished in 1966, it was called Andrei's Passion. The title was different. Then my father had to intervene and do all the work of editing and censorship cuts. So he created another version. The second version was shown and for the projection, private projection for the studios, then closed again. Another version, the third, which we didn't have, it wasn't reserved, and then finally they came out with the final version of the film. So actually, my work last year, we recreated the director's cut. So that means that we had to find out all the cuts that were made for the censorship, but maintain the cuts that my father made all together, because the process of his work with the film was continuous. He always changed something to clean up some cuts, some ideas, to purify the image. So it was a continuous work. It was very complicated to find out where it was a censorship and where it was Tarkovsky. So, but finally, thanks to the people who work on the film, his assistant, and notes and quotes and letters from the Soviet censorship committee, we actually recreated the original version. So, just in brief, the first version was 205 minutes. The distribution version we have, it was 182. And the author's director cut, it's like 194 minutes. So we have like 10, 11 minutes more of the image for the added to the film. Well, now I think after we enter more precisely into the story, into the shooting, and to the philosophical and artistic ideas of the film, but that was actually the time frame and the brief story of the origin of the film.
Well, Andrei, it's great to see you. And maybe just backtracking slightly to the initial the initial impulse of making the film and the interest that was animated in Russia. I found that in 1961 they've published a post stamp for the Soviet post office that was the only post office system in the whole of Russia, and that was a huge statement in the media of that time of distribution of image. And so Russia has acknowledged the anniversary of Andrei Rublev's supposed birth, as you've mentioned, that there's so little known about it, but is perceived to be born somewhere between 1360 and 1370. And so I understand that his persona has become gained certain recognition, or was brought to the level of importance in as a cultural figure in general, right around the time where it coincides with the writing of the script for the film. And do you know why in the Soviet period? Was it related to sort of resuscitation of old Russian culture and kind of a lifting of the ban of the religious associations, or well, how it seems a little paradoxical. Could you speak a few words about that in the context of culture?
Yes, well, I'll try, but I think it was both. We have to say that this generation of the artists and the people who was born in that who worked on that period of the 60s is actually it's the fruit of the 20th reunion of the party. So the famous Congress where Khrushchev announced the crimes of Stalin, and the direction, political direction was a little bit changed, and there was some kind of a freedom. People start to breathe some kind of freedom. And my father used to say also that period, he and his colleague, the students, the film schools, art schools, and universities were feeling that they were free and in their creation, they could do anything they wanted, that they were really inspired and happy in that work. So that actually that period was quite brief at the end, and but all this шестидесятники, as we know in Russia, the people from the 60s, the artists, the great artists that were the colleague, like with my father's colleague was Konchalovsky, Shukshin, Parajanov. That was actually the opening that gave the creative freedom to the artists, and of course, by the 70s, the beginning of the 70s was already closed.
So we're actually talking about, as everybody probably heard of, Stalin. Right after his death, we're having a huge change in the way Russia has been ran and operated. As it came out of the World War II, it still continued to be a very solid and authoritative regime. Maybe even more tightened regime after the war. For it was kind of continuation of the military law and attempts to control the remaining army that returned from the war. So situation was filled with absolute repression and fixed values that weren't being per se religious. However, we know that Stalin did open the churches during the World War II at the very end, as some understand that was done in order to gain some support and give some inspiration perhaps to his people, because they started to fear that they were under some punishment from God, and so there are many theories on why and how it was done, but it was done. And then after the war, it seems like that motion kind of wasn't shut down entirely, but the country was still remaining under this ironclad. And so when Stalin dies, we have the change in office, right, with Khrushchev coming in, and he is not in any way sympathetic to the church, but he is in a change of apparatus and everything else. There is that very brief, as you say, very brief moment.
You made it very clear. Yes, it was just 1953, Stalin dies. 1956, I think, February is the 20th Congress of the party, where Khrushchev denounced Stalin's crimes, and this changement helped a lot of these artists and the school to do the program. So actually, my father shows Ivan's childhood, and Andrei Rublev is taking in place. Many other projects were in not only for my father, other artists is in place. And yes, after at the end of the 60s, the story goes, the regime consolidates again, and all this. So imagine then the freedom of this, the defrosting, as they called it, this period, it's finished. So it became even more strict. So for my father personally, that was actually the period of a lot of difficulties, because actually to avoid the censorship and the fight for his project, because he understood that for 6 years, from 66 to 69, then actually the film came out in Russia. I'm speaking about Andrei Rublev in 1963, only in the cinemas, after Solaris. So meanwhile, he's working on a Solaris, science fiction, a subject chose especially to avoid any kind of criticism for science fiction gave a lot of freedom, creative freedom for that time, as he always used it later for Stalker as well. So but that period actually was quite amazing, flourishing, and that gave the possibility for them to work completely. Actually, I have to say, free on the set, and actually for a young director of 30. He was 32 years old, 34 when he began shooting the film. So such a big project, big budget project. It was, I think, that for 1964, it was the second or biggest film project. I mean, I'm talking about the budget, the biggest budget in the history of Russian cinema for that year.
So when you're talking about chronology of his age as an artist, of your father's, so you're talking right around the age of 33, right?
Yes, he was born in 1932. So
yeah, so he's coming to the age.
Yeah, he was 30 years old. He was almost the age of Christ when we started the film. And actually, maybe most difficult, more philosophical, and incredibly solid film. A lot of levels of interpretation. We'll talk about that, but how a young artist himself they can have that kind of
the pressure, because when we talk about Golgotha, we're talking about his personal, I'm sure, self-reflection in that age. No a person who hasn't read the gospel at least once would not, approaching that age, wouldn't ask themselves certain questions about their existence. And coming to what, just in the context of the work that he's about to do, the depth and the philosophy and even theology and the self-reflection in it, as we can approach it in this conversation, is one thing. But there's also the external pressure of what you're calling, making one of the largest budget films in Soviet cinema history at that particular very shaky period in time, puts you on a very serious, if you will, a cross, as your personal life is put on the line. You are really coming before the Syndrion, you're coming before the your own people, and you're coming in front of you're actually going on a very high risk endeavor, because we're talking about religious film, which has never been made at all during Soviet period, and I don't believe really has been made, and correct me if I'm wrong, during the Soviet period after.
No. In fact, it's quite a miracle itself that film was released, and the scenes. And for example, if you remember the scene of the crucifixion, the procession, the way to Golgotha, it's incredible how it's never been cut out by the censorship, for example. It's also incredible. So maybe there's also some kind of divine intervention into that. I think personally, because that period was. But I have to say that the support he received from his colleague and the people, the older directors who actually engaged him to produce the film and endorse him to do the movie, was also quite a statement for that time. Because everybody was responsible for the production, so it wasn't only Tarkovsky who was supposed to be blamed if something went wrong. So it was the whole studios actually who voted for him to make this film. And that's actually, I think, the sign of that time, of that period, which was quite curious, quite interesting, and unfortunately too short to develop. But it actually gave birth to a lot of great artists and great scientists and people, cultural people, like music and all directions, which actually created that for me that cultural and spiritual resistance during the Brezhnev period. Actually, it was thanks to that small, short period of time. Because these young people, like my father and the people of his age, they actually managed to grow up, to learn, and to form themselves freely in that short period of time.
And at the period that you just mentioned, the Brezhnev period, as we all in the West know as basically the Cold War period continuing after Khrushchev, was a very tense period with the Iron Curtain placed between Russia and the rest of the world again, and crisis of the atomic threat that were constantly generated. And so the period of they call it zastoy or stagnation in a Russian internal affairs, as well as in relations with the rest of the world, kind of solidified in a monolithic sort of cemented state, as it seems. But what happened prior in the creation of the films that then suffered because of that sort of solidification of culture, freezing of it, the films almost like continue to go through the cracks and make the awareness of people still remain alive, and they've had a tremendous impact, almost very difficult to quantify it. But when you're talking about something being completely solidified and shut down, you're talking about mass media of the Soviet regime continuously pumping certain, entertainment films and
completely demolish it. So it's something that is latent in the Russian people. So it's something that cannot be destroyed. It's like yes, as you said, it's not only that period, but I think it goes back. It's something that gives the Russian culture its special place in the world, because it's nonetheless all the regimes, all the problems that it could ever have. And it's always there. It's still there, and it will be there. And it's something that I think, and my father belongs to that period, to that people. As we said in our first meeting about the connection of his artistic connection to the 19th century, to the silver age of Russian culture, to religious philosophy. And so in Andrei Rublev, I think it's something that actually finally flourished in him, as you said. He was ready, and he felt himself ready, maybe never totally ready, but he had to say something, because it was actually his act of faith, act of moral act, as he said about the cinema, the film. So he actually felt that he can speak about the things that really matters to him. He could speak about the religion, the art, the place of artist in life, and actually yes, it's a historical film. It's a biography of Andrei Rublev, but it's also autobiography. Andrei Tarkovsky is a reflection about artist and its place in the world, and the relationship of the artist and faith, religion, research of God. Everything is there. So it's kind of it's strange, but as we can say in my father's biography, this could be actually the last film, but it's his first film, as we say, because he never considered Ivan's childhood totally his film. It was just the beginning. He said, I was searching my path. I was searching for a language. I was searching to become independent. And that film. So Andrei Rublev, his first film, and the first film.
It's interesting that the actor that plays one of the main characters, the main character in Ivan's childhood, is the same actor who plays one of the central characters in Andrei Rublev. Could you speak about that connection? And from what I understand, it played a very important role to find the right characters and find the right actors. Could you speak about the actors a little bit more, both Andrei Rublev and the bell maker?
Yes. Well, that's actually the way my father used to work with the actors, with his crew. It was something that first of all, he studied the people. He studied not only the actors who he was choosing for the film. He wanted to get to know them, and if they think and see things the way he saw the things, so they could work with him. So it was more of a choice of a person, and then throughout all the films, actually, we can see the same actors are working with my father. So he preferred to work with someone who knew his way of working, and also who was sharing the same ideas, and who were actually able, because working with actors, it's a very particular way. Sometimes directors just give a total freedom now, especially the film is made for the actor. The director is not, because the main main character is a good actor, the film will have success and it gains money, and it's okay. That's actually commercial cinema. Well, in that, my father was completely different. He said, if an actor doesn't share, otherwise everybody will be. It's like a director of the orchestra. He keep the complete music score in his mind, and he knows where. But if every violin start to be a protagonist, if Burlaev, who was the Ivan in Ivan's childhood, and Boriska, was the character, and Andrei Rublev, the bell maker, he also tried to find very different ways to work. For example, he always said that the scene that we actually understand as the maybe most important, most beautiful scene of the story novel of the film wasn't too much important for my father. He said, actually, it was too much. It was actually a matter of a different film. The story of Boris could be a different film, and it's a little bit overweights the other parts of the film itself. So sometimes he was joking. He said, I should have made the film that the bell would never ring.
Mm-hmm.
But Rublev will go, and anyway, he will go with Boriska together to paint the icons. It will be even more. So, and the way he's working with Burlaev was very particular, because he said he couldn't find right intonation to his acting. Still, actually, the boy, and he was quite young, Burlaev, his age, 17, maybe 16, was a young man. And and he couldn't find himself in this extremely nervous tension that he had to have on the set for the show. And my father found a way to keep him nervous. He was keep on telling him, and said to all others on the set, tell him that he's terrible. He's a terrible actor. He's acting very badly. He's hopeless, and he will maybe throw him away and find another actor. And when he was doing the scene, he never said, "Okay, that was good." No, and he was become nervous every day of the shooting. And finally, he became so tense, so insecure, that we'll see on the screen. And this, for example, that was actually a very cruel approach to the actor, but actually the result was perfect. And fortunately, Burlaev understood that, and said himself that it was a very particular way.
Right, so you're talking about your father's also gift of kind of fine-tuning, feeling that tension in the soul of the actor he works with, not to treat them as an object, of course, but make a comparison to, say, a string instrument. It's like tightening that
Tuning,
string,
yes,
to make it ring. If you over-exert it, then it'll break. So yes, I heard that sometimes he would even have him sit in a room, and he would say, "We're going to shoot soon, and we're going to shoot in an hour." And then 3 hours go by, sometimes 4 hours. Sometimes people would come by the door and talk things that he would overhear that would sound like, they're not quite sure he's going to make the part, until he would be really on the verge of the nervous breakdown, and then he would go in there without thinking and be very genuine in his acting, or living out that part. And I think
he was extremely sensible toward the people, and he understood the feelings. And that's why, for example, Anatoly Solonitsyn. It was his first role with my father. Actually, he was a known actor from Sverdlovsk theater, and as it was a very big production, they announced the casting for the main role of Andrei Rublev, and there were a lot of actors, great actors, who were trying to go there, and even Vysotsky was
Right.
one of but nobody actually accepted. And then finally, he found and Solonitsyn he never met my father, but he saw Ivan's childhood, and he gets so involved with Tarkovsky. He said, it's the best director, I have to work with him. So actually he fired himself from the theater, which in Soviet time was quite difficult because he found himself out of job. He went to Moscow to make his tryout for the audition for the Rublev, without no certainty that he will make it. And actually nobody from the crew, from the artistic crew of the film, liked Solonitsyn. But my father said, okay, we'll see, we'll try. So they start shooting, but Solonitsyn was never, for the first few weeks, wasn't actually, we can say, given the role. They were actually trying to find out that, and then finally they talked. I think they had a meeting evening. They talk all night long with my father, and then my father understand that this is the guy, because actually he find the same way of seeing things, a spiritual connection. I don't know what was that. And then finally, their relationship from that film till all the films and were perfect, were fantastic. They became very good friends. So actually, Nostalgia was written for Solonitsyn, but unfortunately, he died of cancer in 1982. So my father had to rewrite the script. So that means that he worked always with the same people, because he knew what he can have as a result of the actor, but especially the connection, the human relationship, which was very important for him.
Now, would you confirm the story that Solonitsyn, who plays Andrei Rublev in the film, before the beginning of they began to shoot the scenes, it wasn't exactly shot an exact sequence of events as they unfold, and from what I've heard or read some accounts on him preparing to shoot, beginning with the time when he actually takes a vow of silence after committing a certain it's a murder, really, that we understand that happens, but it's done, and it's a very difficult sort of Dostoevskian question there with the justification of things, and it's definitely philosophical inside the film story. And Solonitsyn allegedly called where he would, some say 2 months, some say 4 months, some say different times, but that he actually wouldn't speak, presumably in order to come into that role really in a genuine spiritual state, to come closer at least to his character. Is that true?
Yes, that's true. Actually, it was the last scene at the monastery. It's Andrei Rublev and Boriska at the pole. It's the last scene, actually, of the film, when Boriska has his crying and yelling against his father, who never gave up in the secret, and he starts speaking and calming his down. So, and yes, he didn't speak for more than a month, actually. Yeah, okay. At least he said that, and that was the beginning of the shot. Actually,
so they were shooting it
he
from
didn't
the
even
back?
know yet.
So they're shooting it backwards?
No, that depends on the locations and on the period of the year, and because actually they have so many locations, and so they have to do the displays between Moscow, Vladimir, Suzdal, and so yeah, they started from the back, actually.
And that scene when he denounces his father, almost I just finished again rewatching this film for I can't tell you how many times I watched this film, and I can't say how much I do recommend for everyone to maybe even see this film, before watching this interview, so that there is some reference to what we're saying, or at least watching it during or after, for sure. And I've noticed that for the first time, that the whole reception where he denounces his father, but at the same time, I felt like he was gaining a father figure in Andrei Rublev, who becomes like his spiritual father, who is receiving him into a new apostasis, into his new life as a bell maker, as a sort of like a forged human soul that goes through this intense and incredible transformation on the edge of again, everything happens on the edge of life and death. And it's interesting that the actors that you're talking about, Anatoly Solonitsyn had to, that I didn't catch that part in historically, that he actually had to leave everything behind in his life in a real way, not as an actor, but as a human being, and put everything on the line to go again on his personal quest in that way. Always, all these things kind of intermingle very genuinely, and spiritually they're not pretentious, they're not acting a part, they're living a part, and it reflects in their lives.
Of course, yes. That's in his memories that was published in Russia a few years ago. This is a story of this fantastic. They encounter the scene when they actually get to know each other. They drank some vodka. They spent all night talking about the film, the movie, and yeah, Solonitsyn was right in that. Finally, I was nobody from a theater, and there was this big Mosfilm production set in Vladimir, and he said between all this very not quite sympathetic people from Mosfilm, he called it the sharks, and very aggressive and not quite interested artistically, you find out this poor soul that my father said it was so vulnerable and so not belonging to that kind of cinematographer type of person who is aggressive, self-confident, and he discovered that, and he said so there, and he was also himself was like this, and he said there's something. They understood that I can go with Tarkovsky anyway he asked me to go, so that was actually their, you could say, spiritual friendship came together. So they met, two human beings met. So that's also very important, I think, for the success of the film and for the understanding between the author, the director, and the actor. It's not only the job; it's also something more that's involved in production such of Andrei Rublev, because too many things are given for granted. But this kind of faith that actor have to have. If my father said, "Okay, you go to jump to the river," they jump. You know, it's all this kind of, but not because it was Tarkovsky, famous director and from Mosfilm. No, it's because they had. They felt that it was right to do, the right thing to do, because they felt they were doing something important. They were creating a piece of art, not just a film. And my father was capable to induce in them that feeling, to share so much of his intentions. And
so you're understanding that this film being infused with so much spiritual, genuine spiritual experience, that all of the people really involved, in all the actors, and maybe the other actors as well, we mentioned only two, the actors that playing other parts, the monastics, and even we're talking about this character that I want to bring up. Roland Bykov, for one, is playing the jester who is who was also, I understood, was invited to play this role of a dancing fool. Kind of actually kicks off the sequence, the linear sequence of the film. And from what I heard, that he was offered to have, you know, that part prepared for him, have choreography, have, you know, writing for that part, where Roland Bykov, who is also a very gifted actor and the director in the future, we will see in Russian cinematography, we see some of the films he directs. some of them are children's films. I recall. I think he played in as a child. I watched it start, and it's interesting is that he wrote this script for himself, this text, this foolish act, and a choreography, and everything he did was entirely him becoming this jester who is actually a very tragic figure. He's steering people's minds and promoting, so they would try to really not act it, but again, be creative within it.
And actually, he wrote the little song that he was singing about the boyarin who was shaved off his beard and so humiliated, so very offensive toward the
And
class.
just a quick history note: boyari are yes, they have beards, and they're in Russia. They're the feudal lords of the time. They're basically similar to senators, and they're the highest ranking after the great duke or the czar. So they're basically the people who have all the power and control in the feudal Russia. So talking anything about them was again borderline, asking for trouble, and that's mildly put.
Yes, exactly, and he somehow represents the spirit, the Russian spirit, the people that actually he was asked to. My father asked him to do this not only as a gesture, but the scene is it meant to be to have this feeling of unity, the compassion and the unity of the Russian people with this gesture. And it's interesting. The film starts with this round. Actually, in distribution version, the scene was cut, but it's 300 degrees camera move of his dancing, and it starts from Rublev, and it goes round, and comes back to Rublev. So it's actually, as you know, in religion, the circle, the perfect idea of the circle, of the unity of it's very important, and that actually appears after also in the films, in many films of my father. This idea of circular panoramics, well, actually, it was very important. It gave actually the intonation to the film.
Right?
Yes, exactly. So we don't know if it's happened after or it's happened before or whatever this man. So it gives this feeling of something something else that's going on in that house. So
Otherworldly.
Yeah, otherworldly, absolutely otherworldly.
So I have a question about the beginning of the film. We get into the prologue and we begin to see the balloon man. And I'm just kind of guessing because, of course, your father's films are films that we always come back to, and we see new things every time we watch it. It's sort of like, you read the Bible, you see something new you didn't see before. And on this viewing, my first thought was, we have this element of the artist who is oftentimes sort of oppressed by what's around him, or the government doesn't favor or allow his art. And so we have the balloon man, who's this really sort of creative, sort of genius character, and he invents this machine, and he's gonna float away. And we have the townspeople coming in, attacking him, and trying to subvert this. My guess is this just the image of the artistic genius and his creativity being stifled? Is that the significance of this first part?
Well, I think could be that. It's like a tuning of the film. The main tune is just started from that. The destiny of Rubio to fly, and as we are talking also about the idea of Icarus and the attempt, to go further, to go to the other world, to get understanding of our human existence. So it's very poetic, I think, and very very deep philosophical tune to the film to get into it. Because at the beginning, the first version actually was starting with Andrei Rublev. The guy sings and he makes his performance. He appears in the corner, and there is a round 360 degrees panoramic camera, which actually was cut because they cut out the flying man, but it wasn't cut by my father. It was cut because they thought that it actually breaks up the timeline sequence of the film, because you see the guy dying on with his balloon, and then he reappears on the first scene of the film. But I think actually it's very important that he reappears. Who is he? Actually, what the timeline? When happens the hut, and when the guy flies, and is he dead? Is he alive? Is an angel already? It gives this kind of strange feeling of something that is not very definable, and something that outwardly to that scene, and that's why actually in the director's cut version I decided to keep, as my father actually decided to keep. He never cut this scene totally. And yes, if I answer to the question, I think it's very important to the intonation to the whole thing. And of course, the first film that my father dared to do is such a big project. So maybe he felt himself as this flying man falling and standing up again. And because actually, and also then, the film closes up with another idea, Boriska, who somehow reflects the bellmaker, who is also completely unaware of his talent, and he also risking everything, because the prince actually is going to kill him if the bell doesn't ring, and so it's like two parallel stories actually closing in a circle of this life performance, life story, life circle of life of Andrei Rublev.
Okay.
Next question is that, in that same scene, we see a horse, and I'm curious because we see horses repeating in various scenes where they pop up. Is there a significance to the repeating horse symbolism?
Well, I think it's not about. I think if we just in brief, as I see and I think about the idea of the film, it's of course it's the film. It's a testimony. It's the film. The title, the first title of the film, Andrei's Passion. So it refers to Christ's Passion. So it's directly to the Bible, to the Holy Scriptures, and the story of his life. And so it's a testimony of life. So it's a reflection on a man and on an artist and his relationship with the world, with the art, and especially with the divine. And it's the search of the divine. And I think in that case, my father, I think then Father Vladimir will help us with the concept of esteemed, which my father used in this film. It is an artistic construction of this, artistic philosophical construction of the film. Of course, esteemed was the Oriental Greek monastic practice of constant prayer and reflection on, which could give you the possibility to approach to God, to feel the enlightenment for a certain moment. But Andrei Rublev actually was. That's very probably true that he was a follower of esteemed, because he knew Saint Sergei of Radonezh, and he was his pupil somehow. And but it was a monastic, how we can say, monastic tradition, and maybe my father changed a little bit that concept. He started from that, and I think in Andrei Rublev this how can you say, to join the divine, to understand the feeling, it goes to have through the empathy, unity, and compassion between the people, and between love. So that's actually, it's not only in a monastic cell you can join that. For Rublev, it's actually the contact, the meeting, the people he met, the stories he follows. It's actually his way to Golgotha that bring him to the enlightenment, the artistic enlightenment. He starts painting only. We never see him painting, actually. We never see in the film. He never acts. So it's also very important. There's no action. He never do anything in the film.
Why? How is it connected to the horse? Going back to Jay's.
Yes, I'm just trying. And I think it's also That's, you see, it's also the this connection, empathy. It's also the relation with the nature, and the nature plays the harmony of the world, of the natural world that surrounds a human being. It's very important. And you see, how in Russian philosophy it's единство. I don't know how to translate it in
the all-encompassing unity, I guess.
Exactly, and this единство is this unity with the world, with the reality. It's also the contact between Rublev, his eyes, and the world. He sees the nature, the beauty of the nature. Of course, in the film, in all the film of my father, nature plays the major role. And sometimes it's well, in Andrei Rublev, it represents this perfect unity. Something to tend to, and the nature is beautiful in the film. The paysage
is this divine simplicity, or
exactly, it's the divine creation that actually the man, in all the way, trying to disturb, to destroy. The horse represent the nature, represent the beauty of the creation. And as you remember, actually, it was my father's favorite animal as well. But in the film, you remember the horse getting killed brutally. He fell off the stairs. Actually, he was killed in the film, and the shooting as well. And that's the worst thing that could happen for my father. Was the hardest scene to shoot on the film. So the destruction.
We're talking about when they siege the city of Vladimir.
The siege of Vladimir. The horse falls from the stairs and dies, and all. And of course, with all this cruelty and this fallen horse represented the crack, the rupture between the human and the world, the external world, the harmony. And I think it's also very important. And the horse appears also at the end of the film, very harmonic scene after the icons, and so it's something that. And also at the beginning, a horse accompanies the flying man. She's behind the church. She's inside the church. It's always there. She turns around and then it reappears at the end of the film. And then the script as well. The horse somehow represents this galloping horse throughout the story of the screenplay. Represents that natural, strong, powerful presence of the God's creation. There's also another very important theme of love, but we will talk about that later.
Well, the next thing that comes to mind for me would be so we see these three travelers here, the three monastics. We have Andrei, Daniel, and Kirill, and they have very different personalities. And we begin to see that there's a bit of envy that starts to emerge here between, particularly, I think, Kirill and Andrei. And we see when they're at the first house that they come to, where the peasants are sort of having this mead-based festival, and we have the buffoon. There's also, I want to ask too about, so we see there's going to be three fools in the film that are mentioned, and then there's going to be these three monastics, and so we see threes popping up a lot. I don't know if that's intentional or if that just happened to be the case, but my first question is the three different personalities of these monastics, and then I noticed three different fools that are referred to, because we have the first fool, who is the buffoon at the party here, who gets ratted on and ends up in jail for 10 years. Then we have the holy fool of the girl, the Durochka, and then we have the fool at the end. Is it Kirill, who says, no, I was the fool. I was the real fool, because the whole time I've been jealous of you, and I schemed and I ratted out the other fool, and I was the real fool because I caused you to stop creating your art, and I realize now that I've been the fool. So I'm just speculating here. I don't know. Is that we have three different personalities at the beginning with the three monastics, and then we have three fools throughout the film. And I think maybe these are different personalities contrasted. And on the one hand, it's the three monastics. Andrei is obviously the protagonist, but with the three fools, God always has a larger plan that we don't see. And God's providence, ends up being sort of, I think, predominant in the film, because it shows who it vindicates Andrei as the real protagonist here, and the truly humble person. And the other characters, I guess the girl is a holy fool in a way. Is that correct, or am I speculating? What do you think?
I think yes, it's to a certain extent it is, but I think the older people represent a little bit. Well, of course, Kirill, it's a little bit alter ego of Andrei Rublev. It's like Mozart de Salieri or something like on that way. But he represents mediocrity. He represents someone who tries, who wants to be, but not given him the talent, and he's jealous because Andrei has that talent to do everything to avoid Andrei creates his work. But and the world full of people like this. Even in the monastery, we see that he was a monk and a friend to a certain extent, because they lived in the monastery together. But since at the beginning of that, it's also, he makes a part of Andrei's existence since the beginning, since this first scene with the fool, when he goes to betray, to call the guards to arrest. Andrei sees it in the window, and he sees the figure of Kirill talking to the guard, and he keeps it for himself. So it's a secret and guilt, maybe a sin that he brings together, keep with him, and he never actually blames Kirill for that, but he observes that. Actually, as I said, Andrei is never acting in the film. He reflecting, he meditating, and he's able to create only after going through all the hell of his own sins, and through all the experiences of this terrible medieval cruel world he's living in. And it's like a purification of his soul throughout this, and meeting the people. For example, at the other side, Daniil Chorny, the idea of finding the way, the truth, the illumination throughout the love and the compassion. And so Daniil represents that, and Andrei at a certain point said, I see through your eyes only. I feel through you. It's a very important confession he makes to his friends, to his friend. And actually there we go back also to this idea of of this unity. That's the way to the perfectment, to enlightenment, which goes through this spiritual unity and actually love, because we're taking a love between friends. And then Durishka represents another kind of love, because it's not very well seen. Rublev in the monastery called not silence but love, and actually it's not. But we can see that when why it was called love, because this totally mentally healthy girl, to a certain point at that monastery, the Tatars came in, and they're actually joking with this girl, and they could hurt her. You remember, harm her maybe, but at a certain point, their leader of the Tatars looks at her, and she looks at him, and it's a very long sequence of how they see each other. It's actually something happened there, and it's actually the look of love. And she left. She's living with him, and the story ends there in the film. But actually, she reappears afterwards at the end. And when the bell rings, we don't see actually the boy anymore, the bell maker. We see her face first, and actually she's transformed in the long version, and she's there with a boy, which is half Russian, half Tatar,
right,
child, and horse, also horse with no carrying this, and she transformed. She's totally sane, transformed, smiling. This is transformation by love, which is also very important. It's also kind of a circle that closes in, and I think it's what my father tried to put in this. Maybe there are some ideas of Karsavin, Russian philosopher, who believed also that spiritual love and even love between man and woman to a certain spiritual level could give this higher spiritual connection and illumination.
Yes. You know, a horse is also typically in the film a beast of burden, you know, and so the horse is like the artist. The artist is the beast of burden, and that he feels this passion, he feels this burden, and then the horse is set free, right? Because naturally speaking, a horse is kind of a wild horse, but then he's tamed and then he's set free, and so maybe there's a connection between the artist and the beast of burden and then being set free.
Well, if I may add, Jay, to your question on the fool, also there's a very almost contextually for Russians that may be not observed as easily from outside, a very important character in this film, who is played by this. He is the keykeeper of the cathedral treasurer, and he's a kind of a foolish character if you observe him at first. When he comes and he's trying to nudge them to do the painting, come on, you know, he's acting very for us in Russian cinema and theater. This actor Nikulin, Andrei Nikulin, he's a very famous comedian actor, comic actor. He's a drama actor too, but his fame was he was actually a clown. He's in the circus in Russia, like state circus as well. So, but he was again, Tarkovsky recognized his dramatic genius, and he's taking this like officially like a famous fool for Russian culture, and he's placing him in the role of this again a fool, but he is a martyr in this film, and the only scene of like a true kind of spiritual, religious, real like format of martyrdom is played by this comic personality for Russian people, which I find, you know, it's kind of resonating with your question a lot. And I think the use of the idea of the fool and a fool for God, which is also very strongly present in Russian Orthodoxy, particularly because we don't have that many fool for God examples outside of Russian Orthodoxy. Maybe Andrew the Fool for God in an old Byzantine tradition, and then we have, you know, say Gabriel or Gebadze, the Georgian saint, has been very recently become very popular. I think there's a movie that just came out on him. He was part of the Soviet Russia. He was a fool for God. I think that essence of that foolishness combined with the drama of life, and sometimes that you know, tears and laughter, joy and sadness as entrance of a Lord into Jerusalem. And there's actually a scene in an icon where they show actually it looks like Christ riding a donkey, but they're not showing the fragment of the icon. It seems like the donkey actually looks more like a white horse, because the symbol of the donkey is this very humble and a very again kind of almost we would say foolish, but for the context of that time, in Christ's time, donkey would be a working animal. He's coming in peaceful way, where horse would be viewed as a conqueror, as a king. But in iconography, it's sort of becoming a blend, because he is now to us as a resurrected Christ. Now he is a king. He's not coming in a militant way, but he's coming in a glorious way. So there's that element. If you observe the last scenes, you will see the image of the horse just slightly presented there in the iconography as well. Just coming back to your comments, Jay, on the horse and on the fool, and you probably know the scene with the keykeeper that I'm referring to.
Yeah, no, I didn't even notice that. That's a great point, and I wouldn't have made that connection to the icon of Christ, you know, and the donkey and the blending of the horse and the donkey. That's I didn't notice that. That's good. So, moving through my notes, then, as you said, it was there's this discussion that keeps recurring of the feast, and the idea of painting a feast, the idea of having a feast. And I didn't make this connection until watching it this time through, because the feast comes up early on, and then we know that there's a structure of passion, judgment, feast, and the film ends with the same sort of structure where we get judgment, where the city is judged. We get the fire, the church being burned, and this kind of stuff. This is all imagery of judgment. And there's certain characters that say, judgment's coming. You're going to see this or that. I think the guy who's tortured says something like that by the Tartars, and then we get eventually the feast. And so, is that the final epilogue that shows the different icons? I think there's also a structure and a sequence, temporal sequence to the icon. So I'm just wondering if that sequence is playing out in the film, because the film is based on seasons, right? So there's seasons. You have it'll always mention autumn, it'll mention winter, and then back, or spring, and then back to spring, right? So there's this recurring cycle that you talked about. Is that what's going on with the feast? That the feast that you can only get the feast after passion and judgment, right?
Well, I think so. Yeah, it could be this, because he always in the film he didn't want to make the judgment scene, judgment fresco so horrible, because the judgment itself was a feast. It's a feast of the righteousness. It's where you are judged, but you could. It's something that you have to tend to, because it's the moment of truth, of revelation and liberation. So it's that's also, I think, this comes with this idea of universal love and enthusiasm, and this which quite particular to this, and it could be, of course, the all the horrible thing at the end, very violent, and story of the life of Rublev then releases itself finally into the burst of colors of the iconic sequences, the only color scenes of the film. So it's the real truth. It's also could be thing, I think, as a real truth is not here on this earth. It's black and white. The true colors belongs elsewhere. It's the world of, it's superior world of and we have to tend to that, but it's only through in that case, through the art of Andrei Rublev, we could see to somehow to touch a little bit the holiness of these images, of these icons. But and I think also that's why the choice of the color and black and white and that. And I find myself, for example, all the sequence, and some, if we studied it very well, the scenes of the horsemen and the horses and the water and the trees and everything reappears in the film. He actually recreated a lot of the reality from the icons on the set. So we can see it's just the eyes of Andrei Rublev transfigure. It's a transfiguration of the reality in a spiritual way, I think.
Well, and then the apocalyptic scenes, of course, refers to the four horsemen of the apocalypse, which, of course, this is some of the central images for that, linking up with the apocalyptic scenes, as EJ mentioned, in burning of the city, and the horse itself is like a very disturbing contrast of that imagery, and the theme of the Last Judgment and the dialogue that Rublev has with Maxim, with Theophanes, the Greek, I mean, and where he's talking about the essence of the of love versus fear, of there are a lot of philosophical and sort of theological interpretations of the judgment, but with all that said, art historically, his judgment scene that he paints in a Dormition Cathedral in Vladimir, the city of Vladimir, it actually has the name of the great prince, and it's where Rublev is distinctly depicting the Last Judgment in a very positive light, which is unusual, where it's emphasized the love, the light, the saints singing. The theme is actually more uplifting than usual, which is in a way also unique to that style of iconography. And we could talk and some other time about the nuances of iconography of Andrei Rublev, but he's a prominent figure because of the Moscow school of iconography versus the Novgorod school that was largely influenced by the Greek style of iconography, by the Theophan the Greek, who worked in a very strong and expressive, and maybe they mentioned that fast style, or Andrei is very, very refined, very delicate, and the meaning and the spirit of that almost tenderness in his work, and the essence of love is communicated perhaps and observed in his work as a defining tone of the Russian iconographic school, beginning with Andrei Rublev, or at least marked by him as a recognized figure by the 100, they call it the 100 chapter cathedral, where all the Russia gathered shortly about 20-30 years after his repose. And they had this whole decision on Russia's sort of path of orthodoxy, kind of breaking away in ways from the Byzantine influences. And Andrei Rublev was sort of selected as one of the prototypes of Russian iconographic style officially for all the church reform that they've undertaken at that time. So he's a very prominent figure in that sense, at least in historic context, that I wanted to add. Thank you, Jay.
The next question I would have is when we see I know we jumped to Last Judgment, but I forgot the pagans. When we see the pagans sort of running around doing the Kupola festival there at the solstice, I'm curious if are we beginning to see the film and Andrei and his adventures as a microcosm, an encapsulation of the history of the Russian people? Is that essentially where we're going? Especially when we get to the bell and we see I'm just guessing, speculating here, is it the bell and the production of the bell and just the perseverance of and the strength of the Russian people? Is that essentially what one element or one interpretation of this film? I know there's a lot of other ways to read the film, but I'm starting to realize, okay, so they're encountering the pagans. This is representing the old, Slavic pagan world before, the conversion to Orthodoxy. And then we get, the production of the bell, perhaps signifying the future sort of technological prowess and inventiveness of the Russian people. Is that an element here? Is that what's going on?
I believe so, because as if we think about also the motives, and that I've been thinking of my father to start with the project, why Andrei Rublev, of course, a great artist and painter and so on, but Andrei Rublev is also someone, as Father Vladimir said, who somehow artistically and canonically reunited the iconic school, artistic school of the iconography, but also he's a pupil of Sergei Radonezh, who actually stays at the source of creation of Russian state. It's the birth of Russian nation somehow. It's a story of Russian formation. So for my father, it was very important as an artist, I think, to find himself, to understand, and to go to the roots, and to find his place, and to reassign himself a place in his country, in his world. It was very important to understand where he comes from and what are the true origins of Russian culture. And I think this film gives quite a clear understanding of that, and not always well received, and but because many idealized Russian history and Russian medieval period, but as all that time were violent. So actually, that was one of the critics that was moved against the film by Solzhenitsyn, who idolized a lot of Russian Russian history, and he said too violent, and it wasn't that, it wasn't that. But I think the idea was exactly this. It's the birth. Actually, the film was in the original script was beginning with the Battle of Kulikovo. It's the Russian, where the Russian fought and won against Tartars, but it's the most important battle for Russian freedom of Russian state. So it's and that was actually the starting point. They didn't shoot it because it was out of budget. It was very complicated, but the idea that he actually shoot was, okay, we don't have enough money. We shoot the day after, the morning after the battle, and that didn't come out. Also in the production, it was too expensive, and then even in the mirror, he wanted to start the film The Mirror with the Battle of Kulikovo. It was very important for him. I think it's also, yes, exactly what as you said, it's just about the history and self-determination of Russia, people as a state, as a culture, and as an independent and free country. That's the one thing. And regarding the scene of the pagans, it could be, of course, a reference to historical roots and of Russian culture, but also I think there also going back also to the theme of love. We don't know because he was a monk, but he's attracted to that. He was a young monk coming out of monastery with no experience of life. So he was wondering, and that was an experience. He saw these people. He saw this ritual love. A young woman, she kisses him. We don't know if there's something more, if there was love between him and that late woman and so. But it seems that he had to experience all the human before becoming a true spiritual and great master. He had to come through not all the sins, but actually the worst sin is the killing a man, and he's saying that he kills the man. Maybe so it's something that gives him the possibility to overcome his sins, and living with sins as actually the spirit of Theophanes the Greek says him in the destroyed cathedral. You live with your sin, but you don't abandon your art. It's something that you have to live always with, but abandon your gift is something. It's a sin.
Yes. Bury your talent is one of the gravest sins that's recounted in the Bible, with sort of a very loud perspective of punishment and eternal captivity of the soul. If we go to that story of the buried talents, Christ is emphasizing it very strongly. So I think that theme for an artist in general surfaces in that very, very loudly, and there's that edge balance between remaining silent as he does as his penance, and at the same time refusing to paint, and is this dramatic struggle within how can I paint God with my bloody hands, right? How can David build the temple? And he doesn't. Solomon builds the temple. So that question, I think, is very strongly there on the edge. Just backtracking to your question about Ivan Kupala, just an interesting observation, Jay. Actually, it sounded to me when you said Kupala, it almost sounds like cupola that we talk about, on top of the churches. But etymologically, the term Ivan Kupala, actually, it's an interesting feast, because Kupala means bathing, and you can see a lot of bathing in that scene and the scenes of that feast but it's actually referred to Saint John the Baptist. So it was one of those assimilated kind of double faith tendencies of Russia that definitely was highlighted for a reason, because Russia, after its baptism, as we perceive sometimes, well, there was a baptism of Russia in 1988 or 89. Kiev was the place where it took place. It's a countdown of Russia receiving orthodoxy. But in reality, it happened over centuries and centuries, and even several hundred years later, the Russian people were perceiving their old culture and their new Christian God as some, almost like a pantheon in a way. They would still follow the old traditions, but the actual feast of of Kupala, which means the bather, John the Bather, if you translate it directly from the Russian, it shows an interesting, even thematic fusion. So people would pray for fertility. There were all other things attached from the old pagan world. However, they were still kind of synthesizing the Christian feast with of St. John the Baptist with their own pagan traditions and cultures. But at the same time, we have this persecution that's shown, which also has place, where at the very end, where he comes back and they're swimming the boat. The boat is hit by this idol, who is also, again, contextually, that's still a little figure of John the Baptist. It hits the boat. I think there's some deep symbolism about the rebirth and purging of the sins, right? Of being washed by the fount of regeneration. And then we're talking about the old world clashing with the new, and then we see a figure of a monk with the soldiers. They're not part of their artists, monks crew that comes in, and it's almost like the Inquisition, and they're coming down and they're persecuting these pagan people, trying to stop their practices and actually trying to chase this woman. And as this woman swims across, there is that. In fact, in Tarkovsky films, the eye contact happens very often. Like you mentioned, Andrei, at the very last scene, there's an eye contact where the Durechka is now this white angel princess, also making eye contact. She's making eye contact with a Tatar. If you watch the Tarkovsky films, as a side note, you want to observe the moments where the eye contact is made, because it's very strong binding force. And so then as she's swimming by, he's looking, and all these people are looking in a boat, and they're closing the eyes of the child, the woman, so he's not looking at this whole scene. All of that is so filled with a lot of rich symbolism and the struggle of battle with the passions that Andrei is going to experience. Where you're right, there is that silent scene where at the end, after he was left along with that woman, we don't see what happened. But to me, at least, it seems like it doesn't imply necessarily there was a actual contact, but I think it implies that he was tempted, and he knew he was tempted. That's why he's standing on these coals and he's burning. And that, I think, shows it beautifully. He was drawn to by his curiosity. He was drawn by his his nature, human nature, which is ultimately at the core of the struggle of every monastic and really every human being, as we're trying to maintain certain purity and try to overcome our passions during our everyday struggles in our lives. Well, go ahead.
Yeah. No, you had the exact same thought process I did, because I was going to say that I noticed this time watching when he encounters the pagans, and when he, when they take him, they tie him up, and he's in this sort of cruciform pose, and then the woman comes and tempts him, and that's really, I think, emblematic of Christ's temptations, right? So he's going through a very similar, it's the passion. So he, just like earlier in the film, when Kirill got mad and stormed away from the monastery and beat the dog, and he said, "I'm going to the world. I'm done with all this." Now, Andrei is having to wander, and he's experiencing the world, right? He's tempted with these things, as you said, that he had no experience with. He doesn't know the ways of the world, and so here's this woman, and she tempts him, and lust and the temptations of this world, right? They're likened oftentimes to the burning, to fire, and so we see a lot of fire in this, and then the water is, of course, what cools down the passions. It washes away and cools the fires of lust and temptation. So that's what I was reading it as. So I like that you brought in the temptations of Christ there.
Yes. And also a small observation, also when he's being crucified, he's saying, "Brothers, don't do this. I'm not worthy." It almost reminds me of they say when Peter was being crucified, he asked to be
crucified upside down, so that he's not compared to Christ, because he's there's that illusion, I think, that's being made. He sees himself as a disciple. Well, he's viewed as a disciple of Christ, and he has that humility not to be compared to Christ in a full sense. Please, Jake.
Yes. So my next question would be as we move to the part where there's the raid, and then the Andrei, hits the Tartar with the axe to save Durochka. My curiosity here is that are there subtle references also to Dostoevsky? Because we have a character named Fyodor. I know that's probably a really common name, but then, hitting with the axe and then grappling with the guilt, this is just like Raskolnikov, in Crime and Punishment. And I know you said your father had longed to do a Dostoevsky film. And so I'm just wondering, are there some themes of Dostoevsky that are kind of sprinkled throughout here?
Well, I don't know. Maybe, why not? Because yes, he took an axe in his hand, not a knife or a sword in a battle, and who knows? Maybe it could be the reference to that. But there, I think it was very important thing, especially this temptation that he was maybe overcome during the feast, the Kupala feast. But there, that was the final, actually, the catastrophe for him as a person, to kill another Russian, especially not Tartar, but a Russian man, and that's actually very important. But could be. I don't know if it's a Dostoevsky thing. Maybe, of course, killing a man. It's the worst and the most terrible scene, and he experienced that, and he was doing that, and.
Well, circling back, as you mentioned, the final scene again. I paid attention to it in the last viewing, where the fool at the very end meets with Andrei, thinks that's Andrei who was the one that caused him his misery and sentencing and cutting off of his tongue. He shows, which is a very brutal silencing of his voice. It will be rectified through it, and after that, everything kind of turns, and the bell rings pretty much very shortly after, which I'm glad it did.
Yes, me too. But it's a very good observation. Exactly, he's ready to give up. He didn't fight. He wants to die, actually, and then only after that, after actually the redemption of Kirill, he said, "Kill me," because he didn't say that I did that, but when he put himself on the knees in front of the. And it's also some way of asking, because he knows that Andrei knew about his treasury. So it's a very important scene. Yes. Yeah.
Jay,
it seems like there's a parallel to envy is a very prominent theme in this, as well as the life of Christ. We're told in the Gospels that they envied him. The Pharisees envied Christ, yes. And so there's a lot of envy, and we see this envy not just between Kirill and Andrei, but also the envy between the two brothers, the dukes, right? One of them wants to raid and kill the other one, and so this leads to a lot of bloodshed. So there's a parallel between the two envies there, right?
Yes, yeah, that's exactly this two envy between Kirill and between the two brothers is bringing to the war. It brings to killing the masters who build the palace, and the catastrophe of human existence is a little bit. I think it's a parable. It's somehow the idea of the perfection of our civilization, which is mostly based on envy and violence, and the predominance of the strongest over the weak and of the other, which still.
Right. Yeah. Well, James says, why do you have wars amongst you? Because of envy. Yeah. It's in the.
Yeah, exactly. Even the Tartar said you will kill yourself with your intestine wars, because it's in your nature. You're just like dogs. And so, because that's why actually when the dogs are fighting, that's a very important thing for a piece of meat, and it's very cruel. But
yeah. Because the men are acting like the dogs.
Yeah,
like
around the Tartars are just laughing around.
Well, the symbolism of animals with the dogs, And when we talk about Kirill killing the dog as he leaves the monastery, see we could say that the dog is sometimes it's a symbol of death in art, but also it's a symbol of loyalty. So there's a positive and a negative in that animal nature that's being shown, and in the context of Kirill killing his own dog that's running after him and almost saying stop, stop, or as being really fully devoted, as he is now he's killing his devotion in that act of total cruelty and mercilessness. So it just shows almost like that a good thing in his heart that was to be cultivated is being murdered, being killed. And then thank you, Andrei, for bringing up the fight of the dogs. Shows that the inter struggle between people and envy. And I would not be able to bypass the idea that we mentioned in a previous interview, and I would like your comments on that as we talk about how important the theme of Judas generally was for Andrei Tarkovsky, that he was actually even planning to make his film that he never made, that was kind of centered around the personality of Judas, or betrayal of brothers, betrayal of course, Cain and Abel comes in. Jay, as you brought this theme up, I think it's a very, very central theme, absolutely central theme in this film. Could you comment a little more on that, both of you?
Well, yeah, but I think also it's Kirill is someone that is necessary to the process of this of Andrei's understanding and self-determination, because it's also some, he sees this treasury, he could follow different paths, and he put in front of this man, and it's also a temptation for Andrei to have to choose a different path, because he liked Kirill. They were friends. They were not only someone. They live in the together at the beginning of the film. They're working together, and that someone they are close to each other. And this envy in the yes, exactly like Judas. It's someone very close to him who get betrayed, and I think it's something that. I think it's also give Andrei starting losing his faith a little bit. I think at from the beginning, his reflection and his temptations, and in a humankind, because the final thing, the final scene, it was with the killing of the masters. You remember when he's crying and he's not able to do in the church. He's not able to paint anymore. He just threw in the dirt on the wall and maybe strange movements. He cries, and that's actually also the slowly this violence and this treasury and everything that happens in front of him is taking him away from the man, from the others. He's searching others, but at a certain point, there's always this counterweight of the violent and terrible person, like a prince with him. Actually, he's was in counter working, but that's something. And of course, for my father, the last thoughts about the last film he had in 1986, before dying, 2 months before dying, it was actually the idea about the Passion of Christ, and a profound reflection about who is Judas? What is the role of Judas in the Christ's passions? What is that? How to present it in the filmic in the film? So it was something that was very important for him.
And the guy that's tortured specifically calls the Duke that raided, right? He says, "You're Judas."
Yes, exactly.
Sold out your brother.
Yeah, yes.
And also,
yes, exactly. There we
brothers...
can compare.
Oh, sorry.
No, we can compare it to this martyrdom. The only true martyr, it's the dying in a church, and he has also his Judas. It's the prince. So it's also direct reference to the passions also. Not imagined by Andrei Rublev through the procession and in the winter scene, but more realistic with Patrick.
and the brothers that have been chosen as actors, they're twins, which is also I think that's so powerful, because they're actually killing each other, but it's like a human being killing himself,
Exactly.
like a mirror again.
Yes.
Jay?
Yeah, no, I'm just still making notes because there's so much stuff here. Yeah, and so so we have death, we have famine, plagues that are mentioned. That's also the four horsemen too. I should have noticed that. I just now realized that the sequences of judgments match up to the four horsemen, that are mentioned in the apocalypse. And of course, Stalker, right, is a very apocalyptic theme. And then, well, many of the films have the themes of the apocalypse, as we've noticed. So next question would be we see my next question is the bell. Why a bell? I mean, I suppose it makes sense in medieval times that you don't have a lot of engineering going on. Maybe you have, I don't know, engineering for building churches, castles, embattlements, and then a bell, right? So it's specifically not something engineered for war. It's something engineered for the church, for theology, for calling people to the services. But I'm just spitballing and speculating here. Why a bell as the the climax of the film?
But I think the bell is actually the for me, as I see it, it's the form of this final reunion of the people, the unity of Russian people around it. It's not around around Prince. They're gathering around the symbol of something that goes beyond the power that be. It's a sacred symbol. And it's a symbol of Russia, and when it rings, and all the other bells of the churches start following, it's like a symphony, and that represents that final, actually, the reunification somehow. What Andrei was searching through his life, like this, to find finally this съединство of Russian people. And of course, it's also the contrast, as we can see, that this poor guy with dressed in rags, and young boy, and all the people who works on this bell. You don't even know at the end until you see the bell coming out of this grave, of this hole. What they're doing there, they're just working with the axes. Is so primitive, and then from all this dirt, from this unwashed and dirty people, comes this miracle of perfect lining and giant bell. It's also, I think, that's a symbol of that, from this unity, from the power.
It's a resurrection.
It's a resurrection.
It's a resurrection.
It's a resurrection.
It's from the grave, Christ rising, and that possible triumphant over death, from the grave, from the tombs, bestowing life. It's coming out, and Jay, as you mentioned, why is it's not a military symbol? Well, it's actually there is a somewhat of a military symbol on the bell, because there is an image of St. George that's been shown many times from different angles as a central image. They're showing the boy leaning against them, and then they're showing a ring, and of course St. George slaying the dragon as the symbol of of faith overcoming, and almost in a militant but spiritual militant way. So we're not talking about literal interpretation of warfare, but I think it's coming to the power of the spiritual warfare that overcomes, and through meekness, and meekness my power, my strength, as Christ says, as Andrei just mentioned. This boy that's absolutely frail, the most barely, he's dying throughout the process. He's falling, he's passing out, he has no strength, he has nothing, and the power of God is manifested through this boy. And in fact, there's that social commentary. There's a beautiful dialogue that is important dialogue that's happening between the dukes that come from Italy, the ambassadors, right? They're speaking to the Duke of Russia, and they're having these background conversation. And in very many translations that I've seen, I sometimes you don't see the actual Italian text translated. So if you're watching the version, it's important that you see what they're talking about, because it's a pinnacle scene where they're going, we're talking about the dirt, you know, how is this possible? Nothing good can come out of Nazareth, right? Nothing can happen. This is boy in the dirt. How can he make this? It's not going to ring. They're mocking it. They're saying, so there's this whole contextual meaning contrast, saying that this can't happen. This makes no sense. And yet it rings, right? And yet it does make sense, because faith transcends materialistic expectations, and Christ transcends expectations of death that we all are living under, and living in captivity and fear all.
Yeah, I didn't even, the version I watched didn't have the Italian ambassadors dialogue translated, so I didn't even know that, but it makes perfect sense too, right? Yeah, that, and it's also, you know, a bell is a musical instrument, right? So we have something that's from the world of art, from the world of, you know, creativity. In other words, it's not, you know, it's not a giant fortress. It's not something to do with, like you said, literal warfare. It's something to do with higher level harmony and symphonia, right?
Yes, I think the musical element in general in all of the film, the soundtrack, and Andrei can comment more on that, is absolutely genius. We're hearing constant sounds in general, and a lot of times those sounds, we don't notice them. They exist as this background of silence, of squeaking, of drops of water. There's always this sound layer that's going on, and sometimes out of that layer emerges certain musical theme or singing, and that kind of turns us into awareness that now there is sound, and then the sound goes back as if it's not there, but actually it's always happening. If we start paying attention, watching in our headphones, we sometimes tune out, and then at the very end, again on the contrast to these ambient sounds that are brilliantly conjoined, all of a sudden we have this symphony, as also Andrei mentioned. The bell of this size is called blagovest in Slavonic, and blago means goodness, or goodness of God ultimately, and vesti novosti is a message of goodness. So the name of this huge bell that would emerge in Russian monastic construction, actually they became more and more available later, because Russia did not have resources of metal at the time of Andrei Rublev. This would have been a rarity, truly, maybe one of the very first and few, because Russia did not have explored the Siberian resources for the metals yet. So for them, when they're taking all these metal treasures, I guess the silver coins, if you will, and the boy says, you know, don't be scrungy, don't be you know, a Grinch about it, just give more. You have to give more. And he's challenging that greed, but also at the same time, it's true, they don't have the metal, and so metal is really priced and expensive. So I think in a film, historically, it's using metal as this almost otherworldly commodity. When they're taking the gold off the cupola, when the Tatars are robbing Russia, that's a symbol of taking the most treasured, the most holy. In fact, historically, they used wood to cover their cupola at the time primarily. Every metal was almost like gold. So making the bell was also an act of a symbol of something absolutely the most priced object you could think of. It's like making it nowadays from like microchips or something. I don't know. You know, it was worth a lot more than we understand. So when that converts into sound, and at Blagovest rings, the other cathedrals hear that low frequency sound that carries for hundreds of miles out into the vastness of space, and other monasteries and churches pick up on that. It's an incredible, really a spiritual experience if you ever had that experience. Sometimes you can still witness it in Europe, where cities have churches inside them where they begin to ring, and that ringing kind of carries across the city. I've witnessed that a lot living in Florence, and I thought it was really amazing. And it's fainting away in Europe as symbolically as this film is communicating that symphony, but it's almost transcended. It's beyond music. It's a resonance of God that's actually being turned off in this world, attempted to be turned off. I don't believe it will. To you, Jay.
Now it's also apocalyptic too. I mean, of course, in the apocalypse, it's trumpets, but you have the sounds that go out, to signify the end, and so that there could be that kind of a apocalyptic thing, given that the film has so much to do with apocalypse. And so his faith, he's then reconciled to his own self-imposed penance. I thought that was interesting too, because we think of vows of silence as typically this sort of medieval Latin Roman Catholic thing that goes on with Cistercians and this kind of stuff. So was that something that he just sort of imposed upon himself as his own personal penance? Because I've not heard of a vow of silence in Orthodox monasticism, but maybe it does exist. I don't know. Was that something that he just decided to do that himself out of his own self-imposed pride, maybe an act of prelest that he then later realizes, no, actually I was wrong to bury my talent, or was it good that he had the vow of silence?
Well, Andrei, maybe.
Well, okay, but I think imposed on himself something that maybe for him was the most demanding, most terrible task. I mean, first of all, he abandoned his painting, which actually was his life,
Right.
and then giving up his speech was maybe the less difficult. But at the same time, he said, "I have nothing more to say to the people." It's the worst maybe for him. In that moment, he abandons his hope of the unity, of seeing the eyes. He's not looking anymore at anyone. As you see, he's looking on the ground. During the period of silence, he's mostly looking on the ground, not in the eyes of the people. He's not.
I didn't notice that. Thank you.
He's not. Yeah, he's not searching for the contact. Especially, he's always with his head down. He bowed. He always. So he's not in. So I think he questions his faith as well, because if he abandons that his belief and of the unity to see the other through the eyes, because when there is a famous procession of the crucifixion in the film, and the background voice of Andrei explains his ideas, a theory. He said, when you feel sad, when you feel sorrow, you meet the people, the eyes of the other in the crowd, and you feel like you met someone dear. It's like как причастие, как причастился.
Communion.
It's like a communion. Yes, it's like a communion.
One soul communing. Because
one soul communion with the other, and he renounced to that. So maybe. He says, I'm not speaking anymore, but at that point, he's not anymore with connection with anyone. So he's lost this connection with this communion with the people. So
I think there is an internal communion that takes place that he has to go through. And with reference to first Jay's question about this practice in Russian monasticism, I would not be able to say exactly the chronology of this practice, and it might have kind of came over to Russia from the West at some points, even after the schism too, because there were certain Catholic influences with like Pyotr Mogila in 17th century was like extremely prominent in certain Western practices, came into the seminary educational system of Russian Orthodoxy later. After, like, we talk about, Peter the Great period and so on. But the idea, I think, is being, even if it was not a common practice, there is that term, молчанники, or the monks who remain silent. And in the context of what he's doing, he actually takes his sin, and there's that commentary in the monastery, as you remember, from the little dwarf person. At first, we don't see that he's a little dwarf, little person. He's sitting at the table, and we see him along eating those rotten apples. Also, I guess we could say fruits, right? Of that expulsion from paradise. They're starving. We're dealing with all these symbolisms, but he says, oh, he has his sin in front of him at all times. So he takes this girl who can't articulate anything, and then that girl is with him, and he's not speaking, and people are assuming that he sinned with her, or maybe continues to sin with her, who knows. And he remains silent about it, so he shuts down his self-justification, which is ultimately one of the greatest, well, in us, for people who are living in communion, again, in repentance, we often come to repent with a certain level of self-justification. Well, I did this because she did this and I did this. Well, they made me do it, right? So he cuts himself off from that, and I think he kind of, yes, recoils back into himself, and he shuts off, which Andreas pointed out so well. But I think that inner journey was not entirely of alienation, but of self-retrospection, a zatvor, as we call it, a seclusion, an inner desert. That's the word I was looking for. And I think that that's very well pointed out, Jay, that you know, it has a lot of levels, and maybe they're not entirely, you know, historically, you know, systematized, but internally they are.
Well, I'm just wondering if as it progresses to where he's confronted by Kirill, and Kirill says, I was wrong. I was the one that kind of set a lot of this off, and you're wrong because you hid your talent and you're not speaking, not just verbally, but speaking through your art. That's what you're supposed to be doing. And because he says, I've sinned, but you've also sinned by not doing what you're supposed to do, which is to speak your gift, right?
Yeah, so definitely, and it's also very interesting the way that when he says that, he said, he cries out, Andrei, tell me anything, don't be silent, tell me something, tell me a word. So he's just trying to be justified himself or whatever, but then he goes away angry, but then he turns and he smiles. He understands Andrei, understands maybe that it's not his ego who is, because Andrei is silent, and it's not that there's something else that's going on within Andrei. There maybe there is a glimpse of I don't know, redemption in Kirill, because he understands finally why Andrei is silent, and why he's not. He understands that it's a process maybe of redemption of Andrei himself, and he's not the main role and main character in Andrei's life. So he understands that, and I think it's important, a very important moment, I think.
Yes, I've observed that as well, and I think generally Kirill plays this sort of, he's this archetype of a passion and it's overtaking a human being, where, you know, when he kills the dog, when he leaves the monastery, he's, you know, he's going through one extreme, then another extreme. He has all these sinful qualities, and at the last point where he comes off to Andrei and he repents, he also does it in this almost like hysterical way, and he's still demanding from Andrei to stop his vow for his own egotistical purpose. He says, well, you should just curse me, but say something. I need it. He wants him to come out of his sacred covenant with God, of his silence, for, again, his egotistical sense. So he's coming from this lower hysteria, and Andrei looks at it kind of like he's hearing a lot of things, but it's all mixed. So there's compassion, there's confession, there is repentance, and then yet it's full of this exaltation, if you will. And Andrei remains closer to, and in, I would say not closer, but very much in what we would begin to talk about, and I will have to comment on that, isichism, the spirit of isichism, where he's observing everything from this inner silence that he's cultivated for years. It didn't just happen to him over time. And he chooses to remain silent not for egotistical reason. And I think he receives that accusation about the talents. He's hearing Kirill truth and Kirill's words, and yet it's the truth mixed with other personal human elements, and so he's not falling for it. He's still staying quiet. He's still waiting in that inner silence. Maybe I'm just reading into it that way, but that's what I observed.
Yes, that's true. Just a curiosity about that. I've been thinking. Yeah, I think in Europe it was 11th century. It was Cistercians who were the order who were silent and meditating. It's actually maybe it's close to Isychasm as the idea of the meditating, and they have the vow of silence. Actually, they never left the monastery. They never left their cells. Actually. And funny, the Nostalgia was the final shot of Nostalgia is within this church without the roof, and it used to be a Cistercians monastery at the time. Yeah, coincidence, but just thinking about
makes perfect sense. Jay, would you say a few words about the Isychast tradition, because I think it is important here, and I know you have quite well articulated some of the most important things about it, if you like.
Well, I could just speak to like the ideas of it. I'm certainly not any kind of real practitioner or any consistent personal practices, but the theology of it historically, we typically associate it with Saint Gregory Palamas and the disputes that happened in his day in Byzantium between the Roman Catholic and Greek uniate monastics that he would argue with, like Barlaam and Akandinos. And Barlaam and Akandinos stress the rational intellectual faculties as really the highest possible faculties. And so for Barlaam and Akandinos, the highest calling is to study everything from an intellectual academic standpoint, to master the sciences and this kind of stuff. And the response of the Palamite synods, as they're called, and the tomos that they put forward is that the real practice and heart of the church is not the intellect. The intellect isn't bad, but it's not the highest faculty in man. The highest faculty in man is his nous, or his heart. And that's where man really has contact with God. And so one has to, through prayer, submit the intellect to the heart, to reintegrate the intellect into the heart, and thereby, through repentance, come to know God, and not mainly or chiefly through intellect and through rational discourse. So theology is really just talking and demonstrating things in a rational way that points you to the prayer, which is the real actualization, the real process of coming to know God. So Andrei, the character, the monastic here, clearly, as you pointed out, is the character who's putting his intellect into his heart. He's exercising love. That's why love is such an important theme throughout the film. Love is the transformative process, because it's loving God that's the key here, not facts about God, but loving God. And that's the whole point of Hesychia.
Thank you, Jay. Yes, as you spoke and kind of resonated back to the image of the bell, also as the image of the heart, which is being forged through this incredible struggle. So it shows that it's not something in a new age sense, just love and peace type of a scenario of love that is really just an excuse for things, but actually the process of this forging, where everything is put on a line, where everything is being melted down, burned. He's going almost into the Hades, where when they're forging it, he says, "Oh, this is really hot," like that. That burning up of the inner passions, the passions that burn us, and us burning through the process of this purification, then forges this symbol, that actual ringing of the heart, yes, that only can happen through this. And if I may, I did in the context preparing for this meeting, we were going through the week of Saint Gregory the Palama, of course, during Great Lent, where he this figure is brought up almost in the center of great land for all the Orthodox Church every time, because it's a very important nexus, I guess, of two cultures, which we do see in that small conversation where the Italians come and the Russians come, and there's the East and West, where there's logic and sort of illogical.
Exactly.
And, we don't want to, idealize. We're shown that among that illogical world, there's all this brutality and there's hostility. Is not idealized reality that's shown in that Eastern sort of, if we will, Orthodox world, which is very far from its ideals. But
yes,
at the same time, we're seeing this connection. And after the week of Gregory Palma, we have the letter of divine ascent coming shortly after that. And in the letter of divine ascent, which is a monastic text and St. John of the Letters, they call him, of the Mount, the abbot of the Mount Sinai, who was it's a 5th century a document that we have in our church that is read by the monastics and the laity during the Great Lent, has chapters, and they're among those chapters, they're called steps. And I specifically paid attention to the step 11, what St. John of the Letter says about silence, where I think we could find some echoes to what Andrei Rublev is experiencing. He says, prudent silence is the mother of prayer, a recall from mental captivity, a repository of divine fire, a guardian of thoughts, a watchful guard against enemies, a school of lamentation, a friend of tears, a maker of the memory of death, a painter of eternal torment, an inquisitive studier of the coming judgment, a helper of saving sorrow, an enemy of insolence, a spouse of silence, opponent of proud teachery, communion of the mind, creator of visionary contemplation, inconspicuous advance, secret ascent. So, with that said, I don't think much to add to it, but I can kind of read the film within this frame of description. If you have more to add, please do.
The only thing I thought of that's great, I didn't know about that, is the metallurgy imagery is also from Paul, right? St. Paul, and I think it's 1 Corinthians 3 talks about being purified, tested by fire, and that's what happens in the film, and then climaxes with the metallurgy of the bell. But anyway, yeah, that's all I had.
Absolutely, and of course with that to Corinthians 1:13, which is literally quoted entirely in
the love,
in the scene of love, that beautiful passage, which is called the hymn of love, that reference with the scene in the cathedral where Andrei is reading this scene. He's reading from Corinthians, he's reciting it almost in his mind, and this little child runs in and she's sprinkling milk. Again, there's this purity. Actually the image and the symbol of milk comes up a lot in Tarkovsky films, where it's floating in the water, where it's spilling in a sacrifice, when there's a killing of Thomas Foma in the movie, one of the apprentices. Andrei?
Yes, absolutely. By the way, I think on the longer version of the film, the letter to Corinthians was cut to a certain extent. Yeah, there was in the first part, and actually there was empty scene. If you see it in a normal scene, it starts after, but there's the first part of the film. Actually, it started. He swapped the two paragraphs of but it doesn't matter. It's a little bit longer. And then, by the way, I have noticed that just between us, I don't know if in English he refers in translation to love or charity.
Yeah, very good observation. Actually, in King James, they insistently translate it as charity. which
in Italian it's the same. An Italian Bible is charity, but the whole thing is about love, not charity. Charity is the
absolutely
consequence of love.
Orthodox, and not just Protestant updated versions that sometimes kind of vulgarize the the language of the Bible, kind of bringing it down to everyday profanation, which we definitely don't want necessarily. But I mean that we need to read it in ancient English that nobody understands. But at the same time, that translation, at least I have a copy here of very reputable version of the translation of the Orthodox Study Bible that's published, at least here in the US, by a number of academics. That's pretty true to original text. It does use the word love, not charity. Maybe in some ways love could be misinterpreted as something lustful or something in the linguistic sense, maybe reduced to carnal. And maybe that was the reason why charity was used in some way. But I think it's highly misleading in a broader sense, because charity becomes something very utilitarian and almost like calling us to give alms, just pay and
exactly.
be
Yes,
careful, buy your way to salvation, which these trends really did exist throughout history in Russia as well. And actually there was this whole clash of directions in monasticism. And in fact, the person that I named wrongly by association, there's a Maxim the Greek, not Theophan the Greek, but Maxim the Greek, was one of the Isykhasts who came to Russia during that period, later period, and he lived in Lavra. In fact, the Trinity Lavra was under arrest at some point because he was slandered for trying to bring up the idea that salvation comes through inner cultivation of that Issachar spirit of Christ within, and the silence of passions. Well, at the same time, there was this huge movement that's trying to overtake Russia that used political and financial funding as a kind of a, like, just build us another cathedral and you will be you will be building yourself a place in heaven. So that materialistic charity started to overshadow the true and cosmic meaning of Christ as God, as love. And in fact, that 13 Corinthians, just as a final point I wanted to say, is that some say that actually it's a description of Christ. If you were to replace word charity in this case, or love, with the word Christ and read it over, and I urge you to try that, you will see that it perfectly describes our Savior.
Yes, yes. Yeah, that's interesting, because in Italian it's carità, and I have the translation, the biblical translation. Every 2 years they publish the new translation from the original text, scripts, rolls, and from Aramaic and Greek, and it's always a carità. But in the film, I was preparing Italian subtitles. I had to leave love because it's fundamental for the film, so we have to have it.
To you, Jay.
That's all I had. I got through all my questions. Thank you so much. We don't have to stop here. If you have any other topics or issues you want to bring up, feel free. Father Vladimir.
Well, I just shortly would say that after going into this film again, maybe for the first time in my life, going through these, going through these notebooks and references in the text, I started going through a lot of observation, and I began to see certain things that I never noticed before until I picked up a pen and started going frame by frame, and a reference to some historical and artistic analysis. There's some very interesting dimensions that are coming from analysis of visual language of Andrei Tarkovsky films. And we spoke just shortly with Andrei about possibility of maybe going after perhaps this film in a new version comes out. Maybe we could reconvene, and if it's possible, maybe once people watch it, because I don't want to dissect this film as this whole amazing wholeness of it to be disrupted by this sort of Thomism of analysis of this beauty that sometimes you just perceive with the heart in the film, and the symbolism and the parallelisms that are almost biblical techniques, where we have things going from one into another. and creating an intense dramatic effect. So for an artist and for a cinema appreciator, this could become a very interesting dimension of experience that I would like to share and invite you to do.
Absolutely, with pleasure. I think that when the version come out later this year, and it will be available for the viewing, we can absolutely go back to that and speak more maybe about not especially the artistic and the imagery of the film, the use of the visual language, which we didn't much talk about because, of course, there were other topics more important. But this is also something of the incredible. And going back to the novel of the bell maker, Boriska, I think my father was absolutely autobiographical. 32 years old, Soviet young film director, making that kind of film, a second film, but this mastery and imagery and language is out of extraordinary, something miraculous. I think it's something that, yes, you can say a gift of God, or we can call it anyway, but it's something else were an emotion when this film was shot, something else that was involving in this story, because it's simply impossible for, especially I know I'm from the business, I know to afford such a project at that age, I don't know, it's impossible today. But so it's I will talk about that with great pleasure later, maybe next year when the film will be released.
When is the film expected to come out? The dates?
I think at the end of this year, the end of the year. And then hopefully, if it finds and goes into distribution in America, maybe it will be shown next year, in the beginning, maybe. That's actually not, unfortunately, not depend on me, but we did our restoration, and we have to go back to the distributors and the producers of the film for their agreements. So we'll see. Hopefully, I would love to show this version because it's I think it's adds something to already beautiful film, and that I think we talk about it. The sequences, this longer version maybe explains a little bit more deeper this cinematographer language that my father had, and what we missed from the beginning.
Thank you, Andrei.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you.
Thank you.